Okay, perfect. Joy, you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. All right. So thank you so much for everyone for tuning in for Black Grief Matters. It's a fireside chat with Marisa Renee Lee, brought to you in collaboration between Good Grief and SoFi.
And I'd love to start just with a little bit about Marisa. She's a writer, speaker, and entrepreneur. She's the CEO of Beacon Advisors, a mission-driven consulting firm, co-founder of Supportal, a platform that makes it easy for people to respond when someone they care about is faced with a life-changing challenge, and founder of the Pink Agenda, a breast cancer nonprofit in honor of her mother, Lisa. In 2010, Marisa joined the Obama administration, and during her time there, she focused on a variety of issues, including entrepreneurship and access to capital in underserved communities, implementation of the Small Business Jobs Act and the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and developed a variety of public-private partnerships with the business community on behalf of President Obama.
All righty. So we're so happy to have Marisa here to talk with us all today. So please feel free to submit questions via the Q&A function throughout the discussion. But with that, let's dive in. The here and now. How have recent events affected you as a Black woman in America?
Well, recent events have honestly just left me feeling exhausted. You know, I know Rachel is familiar with all of the different ways that grief impacts you, both physically and mentally. And I've just been really worn out, to be honest. You know, I feel like we have been in a similar place before. You know, this time it does feel a little bit different, and I hope that means that things will look different going forward. But I also just feel worn out. You know, I'm 37 years old, and the fact that, you know, I've seen these types of moments of intense violence enacted in public ways on Black people multiple times. I mean, it's just, it's a lot. It's a lot.
And I guess in that vein, you know, we're here together with both SoulFi and Good Grief. How is grief playing a central role in what's happening for you, for Black people, for America in a moment like this?
Yeah, I woke up one day a few weeks ago and realized the anxiety, you know, the sort of heaviness, the exhaustion that I was feeling was grief. And because of the way that I personally process things, I sat down and I wrote, and I ended up placing a piece in the Grio on Black grief in this moment. You know, I lost my mom almost 12 years ago, and last summer we lost a pregnancy. And so I have, I think, unfortunately, again, similar to you, Rachel, a very deep understanding of grief, and I just felt terrible. And I needed to start to think about, okay, you know, now that I'm able to reframe this moment, not just as a moment where, you know, as someone who's a political activist feels drawn to take action and to do these different things, and, you know, I'm angry and I'm frustrated, I had to recognize that I'm also grieving, and so are all of the Black folks in America. And in conversations with non-Black people who I'm close to, I realized so are a lot of other Americans. You know, this is a moment of reckoning. I think it's a time when people, you know, non-Black people maybe realized before that things weren't perfectly equal in our country, but I don't think folks realized just how bad the situation was until, you know, they were really forced to deal with it in this moment. So I think there's a lot of collective grief, and I think based on my personal experiences, you know, we're not really going to be able to move through this and get to the other side in a way that actually does allow space for building a new normal without dealing with all of these feelings.
Wow. Well, you know, you mentioned your mother's passing. So what are some of the methods for self-care after losing your mom to breast cancer and working through that grief that you're employing now?
That's a great question. So I was admittedly pretty terrible at all of those things when I was 25, because, you know, I was 25 and then I lived in New York and worked in finance, and I just wanted to get back to life the way it was before, which I've come to realize 12 years out was not possible. It's still not possible at this point. And it took me a while to really work through that grief because I didn't know how to manage what I was being called to manage and to deal with and to work through in that moment. And so I did a lot of silly, 25-year-old things. But since then, I've learned a few coping mechanisms that have definitely helped me in this moment. I am someone who is prone to feel anxious when I'm upset and when I'm grieving. So figuring out how to manage my personal anxiety, lots of meditation, lots of exercise. You guys can't see it, but I am facing my Peloton. I have fully joined the Peloton cult and I love it. I am also really big on thinking about taking intentional breaks, even in the middle of the workday. I've become obsessed with this woman on Instagram. She runs an account called the Nap Ministry, and she is all about rest, particularly for Black people, as an act of resistance, as an act of liberation. So just thinking about, how even in the middle of all the different things that I'm managing that you mentioned, how to take a couple of minutes to just breathe, take my dog for a walk, just take a break, because it's a lot. There's a lot of incoming. Another thing that is a challenge, but that I try really hard to manage when I'm, in the middle of a difficult moment, is how much time I spend online, which is, we're all online right now. We're living everything online these days. But I have set timers for myself on all of my social media apps, and I try to keep from just scrolling, that mindless scrolling. You're putting all sorts of stuff in your head that I don't even think we're conscious of half the time. So those are some of the things that helped me. And then I love to cook and to eat, and I also really love bourbon. So those are kind of my vices as well.
Yeah, and I know in my experience of being the grief expert can be a burden when you're kind of the first amongst your friends and network to experience significant loss. How can our Black colleagues find the space to take a much needed break while also not feeling like they can't because they have the knowledge to step up and somehow magically fix this entire situation?
Yeah, I think honestly, a lot of that sits with white colleagues. How are you intentionally creating space for Black people to take a break? Instead of asking them, what are the 5 books I need to be reading to be a better ally, ask them how they're doing. Get a sense for what work is on their plates and maybe take something off. I've had lots of folks these last few weeks show up for me in a variety of ways, particularly in professional settings, creating opportunities for me to do work that I really care about and that I'm passionate about, and also taking work off of my plate when they see that I'm, in these kinds of spaces and doing all of these different things and I need a break. I've also had folks reach out and just send me little things, whether it was a card or just a little care package. I think a lot of Black people feeling like they can take a break, acknowledge their grief, get some rest, and hopefully experience some joy is in the hands of the white people who we work alongside and in many cases work for.
Okay. Oh, wow. Well, I resonate what you said about taking a break away from social media. I'm really big on that. Sometimes if it's just too much, I'm I need to just step away for a while. But how about the intersection of activism and social media and the mistake of believing that social media posts alone truly advance actual efforts to dismantle the systemic subordination of Black people?
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit recently on MSNBC, and my feeling is, while I appreciate all of these folks from all races and backgrounds and even different countries at this point posting things on social media that matter, whether it's paying attention to what's happening in Kentucky today around voter suppression, or calling for Breonna Taylor's killers to actually be arrested and properly charged. I appreciate it and I'm grateful for it. And I think it definitely demonstrates something, but we can't mistake that for actually doing the work. Like putting something up on social media takes at most a couple of minutes. And it also isn't an activity that, you know, if you're interested in being an ally, if you're interested in like being an accomplice in this fight, you should be doing things that also feel somewhat risky. You should be having the hard conversations with your family members who are maybe a little bit racist. Like you should be on the front lines of these protests. You should be taking actions and speaking up in meetings at work and making other people feel uncomfortable. Posting a black square or a trendy hashtag on social media, that doesn't really do it. Especially because right now, frankly, it is trendy. Like being woke is cool. If you're not woke, people are judging you. So if you're gonna really like step up and do something, step up and do something.
Of that. And just a reminder to send questions via the Q&A. We'll have plenty of time for questions, so definitely want to make sure people get to ask Marisa all. But from knowing you on a more personal level, which is a plug to follow Marisa on Instagram or at Marisa Renee Lee, I happen to know you're half of an interracial marriage. How does this affect your perception and response to instances of white violence? And if you can, I don't want to ask you to speak on behalf of your husband, but talking a little bit about that dynamic in a time like this, I'd be curious to hear.
Yeah, it's interesting because yes, I not only have a white husband, I have a white husband who was raised in Green Bay, Wisconsin, which is literally one of the whitest places I've ever been in my entire life. And I've been in most of the 50 states at this point. When we go back there, it's almost always a guarantee that we'll deal with some racist something or other. It's also really funny for me sometimes being back there. You know, I've been followed in grocery stores, not by anybody who thinks I'm going to steal something, but by kids who see me and think that I'm going to lead them to some star Packer player. And instead I'm married to this like white guy scientist. So I'm a disappointment to people in Wisconsin on so many levels. So, you know, for Matt and I, we had to have these conversations from the very beginning and he'll kill me for sharing this story because now he realizes how messed up it was. But at the time he thought it was funny. We'd been dating for maybe 2-ish months and his parents were coming to visit DC from Wisconsin. And, you know, he told them about me. We had plans to do all sorts of things with them, whatever. And at some point, a couple days before they show up, he says to me, I didn't tell them that you're black because I think it'll be really funny when you walk in the room and you just happen to be black. I was like, back up. Like, do you want to break up? B, do you want me to kill you? Like, C, you need to get on the phone right now and tell them the truth. Otherwise, like, I won't see them while they're here and I'll probably never see you again. Obviously, he got it together. That was like 9 years ago. But he said something to me in the early days, right after George Floyd's murder became public. He said, you know, I am so sad. Like, I feel so upset, but I know that I'll never really get it. And for me, that was enough for me to feel seen in this moment. You know, like I'm glad that he feels sad. I'm glad that he feels bad. I'm glad that, you know, as a white person who grew up without many white people around, it all makes him wildly uncomfortable and upset. But I was also glad that he recognizes that whatever he's feeling is like this compared to like what I'm feeling, you know, what my father feels, what my 98-year-old grandfather feels. Like, it's not even close. So I really appreciated that. You know, we talk about this stuff all the time. He brings it up all the time because he knows that it's important to me. It's both my life and a big part of my work. So he also has been really thoughtful about forcing me to take breaks from all of this stuff. You know, sometime in the last few weeks, it was just just a long day. You know, I think it was the day the Grio article came out. And then at the same time, I'm doing all of this racial equity work, you know, through my consulting firm. And it was a lot.
I think it's the part where you also did a Q&A for Glamour with a couple celebrities and with Cory Booker.
Yeah, it's been crazy. Yeah, it's been a crazy few weeks. And he said, okay, like tonight you need something funny and just like silly and ridiculous. And we ended up watching, now I'm not gonna remember the name of the movie, cheesy, romantic comedy, silly, oh my God, it's on Netflix, Lovebirds maybe? Is that what it's called? Maybe that's what it's called. I'll follow up with you, Rachel, and make sure you have the name of it. But anyway, he made me watch a ridiculous movie, and he knew that like that's exactly what I needed in that moment. So being with him, I mean, it definitely has its challenges because I'm on my own. You know, like he's never gonna get it. But it also has presented an opportunity to know that like people really are capable of changing over time. You know, I've seen how he's grown in his awareness of just how serious this problem is. And that has given me some hope.
We also had someone in the chat confirm it is Lovebirds and with Issa Rae and Camille.
Yes.
So
Yes, thank you. I highly recommend it.
Wow. I was like really excited. I'm just really excited about this, and I can't, you know, I'm part of the other half of an interracial couple as well. So I'm just like, oh my gosh. yes. Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, it's an interesting thing, especially when bringing children into the picture and everything. But so I was wondering also, like, what advice and counsel are you offering to other individuals and organizations who are seeking out like input on how to best respond to the current situation?
Yeah, I mean, it depends a little bit on like organization versus individual and even the type of the organization. But one of the things that I have been saying to people for a really long time in the context of grief and loss and how you show up for people when they lose someone, I think also applies to this crisis. It has to be authentic. So I'll give an example. McDonald's coming out and saying that Black Lives Matter when most of their employees are Black people and people of color who aren't paid a living wage, it feels ridiculous and insane. So I think anything that any individual or company or nonprofit organization decides to do, it needs to be rooted in authenticity and in an understanding of whatever your limitations are. Because we shouldn't all be doing the same things. We can't all do the same things. Each company shouldn't be doing the same things. You know, like it should look different, but everyone should be doing something. And then the other thing that I'll say that came up in the context of my conversation with Cory Booker, you know, oftentimes people will say that this isn't a political issue, you know, that it's about hearts and minds and individual feelings, and, you know, we just need to be nicer to each other and love and respect everyone. And while I agree with that in theory, and that sounds lovely, at the end of the day, it is inherently political. Just like slavery was political, just like the Civil Rights Act was political, just like my marriage was political. It was illegal for Matt and I to be married a little over 50 years ago in this country. Like, it is all inherently political. So don't let anyone tell you otherwise, because it's just not true.
perfect. And then I have one more question for you, and then we have a few queued up in the Q&A. If you can come a little bit closer to the mic, I think some people are having a little trouble hearing. Perfect. So as the white person in this conversation, I will come out and say it, guys. I don't think you heard it here first. What does effective allyship from white people look like?
So again, I think rooted in authenticity, and it has to be a continuous thing. Like, just like, and I know you know this because I've been following you on social media for a while too, just like your grief has changed over time, but hasn't gone away because, you know, these people were your parents. Like, it shouldn't go away. My struggle to just like exist safely as a Black person in this country, for better or worse, it's going to continue beyond this moment. No matter how much we're able to achieve socially, politically, economically, etc., from this summer of unrest that we're currently in the midst of, it's still not going to be the same. Like, I'm not going to have the same freedoms that you have. So continuing to consistently show up and do the work and think about everything that you're doing, how you can be more inclusive, how you can provide more support, how you can use your power and your privilege and the safety that comes with existing in white skin to look out for other people. Like, that is what makes it real, you know, and that's everything, you know, just some concrete examples. One of my girlfriends, one of my childhood best friends, blonde hair, blue eyes, best friends since 6th grade. Her kids have only gotten dolls, from her and from me at least, with dark skin. You know, either it's a Latinx doll or it's a Black doll or it's an Asian doll, no white dolls from us. And now when her daughter, who turns, I think 4 tomorrow, now when she goes to the store, like, that's what she gravitates toward. And it's the littlest thing, but it has changed for that child, like how she associates value with things and like what she thinks is pretty and attractive and cute. And we need to be like starting at that age and looking for the little things and the big things. You know, who's on your corporate board? What does the C-suite look like at your company? Who are you mentoring at work? You know, are you making sure that you're doing intentional outreach to other people at the company who maybe don't look like you, but are also experiencing grief? Like, it is every single thing, because for us, like, it is in every single thing. So yeah, that's my advice.
Do you want to take one of the questions for me to the Q&A or the chat?
Yeah, absolutely. Carissa actually had a question, so I'll go ahead and read it for her if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I'm speaking as Carissa, by the way. I am a Black woman and I'm finally angry, and I'm not used to this feeling, especially because of so long I was told to smile and rise above. What do you do with this feeling? Can I tell my white coworkers to stop asking me about it because I'm trying to figure out my anger?
Yeah, so first of all, you can ask for whatever you want, Carissa. Like, be entitled. If there is anything I got from my grief, it was a mild sense of entitlement, because the world took my mom, so now the world must owe me something. I don't know what, I'm still figuring it out, but be entitled, ask for what you want, ask for what you need. And then with hard feelings, whether it's, you know, sadness, depression, anxiety, anger, like, the thing that I have had to learn the hard way is, honestly, the best thing you can do is just sit with those feelings. Like, they will go away. They're feelings. They are meant to go away. But if you try to just move past them instead of like going through them, it's not going to work.
We have a question from Caroline Richards that said, tell us more about working with the Obama administration. What was that like?
It was really hard. It came about, again, grief is so funny. You know, my mom died, I was 25. She just turned 49. I was working in finance. I was kind of like, what am I doing? You know, now that this person who I had oriented my life around for so long was gone, like, what was I doing? And I went back and I had actually written in a journal back in January of 2008. So like 6 weeks before my mom died. And a couple months before it was clear that Barack Obama was even going to be the nominee, like, that's where I belonged. Like, I needed to find a way to work for this person. And so I went back to that, harassed a bunch of people, again, that sense of entitlement, until somebody gave me a job. And, you know, it remains one of the greatest experiences I've had in life. And I am happy to tell you that President Obama is as delightful as you think he is. You know, I remember a meeting in the Oval Office where I was the like youngest, least experienced person in the room. And he took the time, you know, in the midst of this conversation to say like, okay, Marisa, well, like, what do you think? Do you have anything to add? And I mean, the fact that he said my name, I mean, I almost like melted into the chair. Like it was intense. And then, you know, he's also the guy who made fun of my dad and talked shit to my husband, about football. So yeah, he is as charming and lovely and intelligent as he seems to be, and I miss him very much.
That's so cool. So we also have a question from Tehran. What is the best way to be supportive of a grieving spouse?
Ooh, that's a great question. And it is something that I have struggled with. I'm not good at being the griever. I also think I'm sometimes not that great being the supporter. But I think for a grieving spouse, assuming we're talking about in this moment of race and a biracial relationship, I think acknowledging that you are not in a position where you're ever going to fully understand how this person is feeling. And then I think taking some concrete actions to, I don't want to say help them feel better because that's just not how I actually think it works, but to help them heal. And I think healing takes time and it takes space and it takes up a lot of energy. So like if there are things that you can take off of this person's plate, you know, there were a couple times when Matt was like, I'm ordering takeout tonight, because God only knows what time it was or what I was doing, but I was not thinking about whatever I had originally planned to make for dinner that day. Or, you know, taking on extra chores, like inside or outside the house, running an errand, like thinking about the things that you can do to free up either like actual time or even just mental space for someone so that they can take the time to tend to their feelings. Like I think that really does like help people kind of work through and process their feelings.
Yeah, it reminds me of, you know, just even tailoring things to say, instead of saying, how are you, right? Which is such a broad question that anyone who's in the middle of grief has like, I've been through every single emotion today, so how could I possibly begin to answer that? Versus, you know, how are you today? How are you in this moment?
Yes.
Doing some of that labor. We have an anonymous question that came in. Is there any possible way to prepare for loss? My dad, who is my very best friend, is in very poor health, and it's become more and more likely that I will lose him far earlier than I ever would have expected.
The short answer is no. And I say this as someone, and I've written about this and happy to share with Rachel, who can share with others, but no. I tried so hard. I read all of like the death books. I took notes on them. I had multiple spreadsheets with tabs from everything to like, you know, what my mom wanted to wear for the funeral, you know, who she wanted to give stuff to, what songs she wanted, pallbearers, you know, things she was worried about with, you know, my parents' house. Like I did all of the things. And my mom first got sick when I was 13 and then died when I was 25. So I technically had 12 years to prepare for a life to not be, you know, the long life that my grandparents, thank God, are still living right now. And it still wasn't sufficient. And I realize now that all of that preparation, it definitely got me ready for the funeral. Like I threw one hell of a party, but everything that came after that, like I just, not only was I not prepared for it, but I almost think that because I thought I was prepared and I had also promised my mom that I was both prepared and I would be just fine, I ended up expending a lot of energy being okay, but not recognizing that in that moment, you know, in those days and weeks and months after the loss, like it was actually okay to not be okay. And I would have been better off being a complete mess than doing what I tried to do, which was just get back to life. Like I literally would show up at work every day. And I went back to work 2 weeks after my mom died. And every time I would turn the corner on Broadway in New York to go into my bank, I would start having a panic attack. And if that wasn't a sign that like maybe I wasn't ready to be back at work, I don't know what was. But instead of like taking that as a sign and maybe taking myself back home or like finding a way to get out of town or something, I was the power through girl. And I would hide in the basement of this investment bank. One of my girlfriends would come downstairs. She would bring me a Xanax from my desk, a soy latte, and a cookie. And I would like have a meltdown, medicate, and then go back up to work in like 20 minutes. So please don't do that. That is like my like biggest, most important piece of advice at this point, 12 years out, is like let yourself fall apart. Like it will be okay, but it's going to take a long time and there's nothing you can do to prepare. But the thing that I did that I know I will never regret was be there. So like if you're in a position where you can, you know, your dad's your best friend, like where you can really be there physically and, you know, ask any questions that you want and even just like hang out, like that is the thing that you won't ever get back. So that would actually be my advice.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, I mean, you've said it all so beautifully. And, you know, I lost my father about 5 years ago. And I agree that there's no way to really prepare for that. I did a similar thing where I kind of just read as many books as I could.
Totally.
I was in school for Ayurveda at the time. So learning like the Eastern way of how they prepare, you know, and everything. And, you know, coming up on that actual time, I did, you know, I sat at his feet, literally, as much as I could. I gained as much of his wisdom and anything that he wanted to talk about. If he didn't want to talk, I rubbed his feet, I rubbed his hands, and almost catered to him almost like a child, you know, and just so that he could feel as much love and comfort, you know, because the thing is, you know, it's a scary thing for us and we are going to have to express that, but having them feel that comfort, having them feel that peace and that love is what what really helped us as a family in being there, because he's exactly. He seemed more peaceful and just more relaxed than he had been throughout the entire process of his cancer. And so I don't know if that helps as well, but I totally agree, and I've experienced it, and it's hard. And 5 years later, Father's Day still gets me.
Oh, it's awful.
Yeah, it's tough, but yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah, I think the only thing I do think that you can kind of prepare for ahead of time, other than like reality, right, of that this is going to be bad and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, is also possibly like building a community for yourself as much as possible.
Oh, that's a good point.
Who are the people you know who have had similar experiences that you know can be there for you when you kind of get to the other side? Because it's really hard to pick yourself up and find your people at the same time. And so anything you can do while you still have that strength might be helpful.
No, that's a great point. I had a crew. I have 11 roommates from college, which is obviously absurd. And a handful of childhood best friends who are also now close to those 11 roommates from college. And, you know, before I lost my mom, there was a communications plan, again, tied to the spreadsheet. And as like ridiculous as it was, it worked really well. And all of a sudden, everybody was there. You know, people came from all over the place and were in and around my parents' house within 5 to 24 hours. And these are the people who like helped me plan that badass funeral, and then shepherd me through to like today. So yes, finding your people, and to the extent that you can be clear with them about some things that you expect to need and how they can help you now, will also make it a lot easier when you're actually going through it.
Love that. We have time for a couple more questions, so I just want to encourage anyone who is on the fence about whether or not they should send it in. I say go for it. I have one question for you, I guess, myself, is just how does, we see faith as a thread through a lot of what's happening in the Black community and kind of the outrage, understandably, in the situation we're in. So I'm curious to get your perspective on how faith informs kind of the Black community's perspective, especially since we've already gotten into politics. We might as well get into religion and just call this whole thing.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Big picture, faith remains a cornerstone of Black culture. I especially look at my grandparents' generation. They are a product of the Great Migration, from Jim Crow South to New York. They planted a church with some other folks when they got there. And that is the church where everyone in my family was baptized. So it is absolutely critical. I think it's a challenging time for people of faith, particularly traditional Christian faith, to not be able to gather. I feel like we've sort of forgotten that in the midst of all of this racial unrest and protest and just insanity that we're living through right now, there's still a pandemic. My husband, the scientist, works in public health, so he's COVID all day long, so I can't forget about it, but that's still a thing. And I think that has made grieving properly and also celebrating and experiencing joy for Black people right now complicated. And then for me personally, I grew up in that church that my grandparents planted, but I have found, and I'm facing my bookshelf with all of my Buddhism and Jewish and Hindu, I pull from a lot of different traditions, and I found that really useful for me. I don't know if that's helpful to anyone else who's dealing with either grief or trying to sort through all of this racial unrest and tension and challenge in this moment. But I've come to embrace spirituality sort of broadly as really helpful in thinking about how we move forward, how we deal with all of these feelings, how we engage with one another in a way that is both authentic and rooted in love in its truest sense. So I'm a big faith person, even though I curse a lot. So I feel like sometimes people are surprised by that, but I am a big faith person over here.
All right. It looks like we have one more question before we close out. From an anonymous attendee, how do you deal with systemic racism in corporate? Many minorities are often overlooked or simply dismissed for opportunities that they may certainly qualify for. And these situations can cause sorrow that is misunderstood and isn't so easily recognized or explained to individuals who are not African Americans.
That's a tough one. It is a very real thing. I personally have been really fortunate in that in the workplace, I haven't encountered it. Even working at a very white, very conservative, old school private bank in New York, where I was the only Black woman. Frankly, instead of having to deal with the racism, I was embraced as, oh my God, finally we have someone who's Black and a woman who works here, and I got away with murder, to be honest. So how to deal with it, honestly, my advice, particularly because I think things are starting to shift and more people are starting to recognize that that is a real problem in corporate America, is to seek out some powerful allies and mentors. Don't assume just because one person on the leadership team didn't do the right thing or, looked past you or, didn't acknowledge your accomplishments, that everyone is the same. So I think if I were in a position where I felt like I was encountering racism at work, I would look for senior people who I trust, who I could call it out to. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And then frankly, I think if you continue to be overlooked and if you feel like how you've been treated isn't properly acknowledged, I would find somewhere else to work.
Looks like we got one last breaking question that I think we can sneak in here before we leave a little bit of time for closing remarks, but an anonymous attendee as well, knowing that one key of white allyship is taking the emotional labor off our Black partners and friends. How do you most wish your white friends would engage with or check in on you, i.e. instead of asking, how are you doing?
Oh, that is an excellent question. I think what has been most helpful for me and made me feel most supported and seen is, while I appreciate the casual, especially from a real friend, like, how are you doing? Because they know that I'm not really doing that great. I've really appreciated people who've taken some sort of action on my behalf. People who have reached out and said, like, hey, I reached out to my friend who's a producer at CNN and you're going to be on air next week. Like, that was really helpful. And it was something that I wasn't even looking for, that I wouldn't have thought to ask for, that someone else put in front of me. Someone dropping off or sending a little package to our house. Like, that is incredibly appreciated. Someone, if you're looking for something to say as opposed to something to do, saying something like, I want you to know that even though I don't get it, like, I know this is really bad and I am going to be engaging in these ways. And I'm not telling you so that I can get credit or to brag or whatever. I just want you to know that, like, I see that this is a problem and I am going to be a part of the solution. And then I think regularly checking in and offering to do things. I am bad at all things technology. We talked about social media. I'm not very good at social media. So I made an offhand comment to one of my girlfriends about how I had thoughts on resources that folks who want to be allies could access. And she's like, oh, I'll make it into slides for you for Instagram. I'm like, oh, great. Yeah, I don't know how to do that. So looking for opportunities regularly to offer yourself and your talents and your labor up, I think really will be appreciated.
Love that. Well, thank you, Marisa, and thank you, SoulFi, for joining us together for this event. Joy, I don't know if you want to add anything, or Marisa.
I just really enjoyed it and I was really excited, and I feel like I have a lot of notes to go over, and I can't wait to follow you on Instagram when I get back on social.
Well, thank you. This was really fun. I appreciate it. It's hard talking about this stuff, but I think we have to.
Love that. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in today, and we'll be sure to circulate the recording so that you can all listen to it or share it around. Thank you.
Thank you.